Welcome to Impostrix Podcast, where we affirm the lived experiences of professionals of color who navigate imposter syndrome and racial toxicity at work. The tools that you learn here will help you confidently address racial toxicity at work, put that imposter syndrome to the side, stand in your power, and resist racial gaslighting. I'm your host, Whitney Knox Lee, a Black mother to Black boy children, a civil rights attorney, and an anti-racism educator and trainer. If this is your first time listening, welcome. We're glad you're here. Episodes are published every week. Make sure you go back and listen to our past episodes. All right, here we go. Welcome back to the podcast. I am here with Dr. Kanika. I am so excited for this conversation. I have been reading through your book, Dr. Kanika, and as I mentioned to you in email, I'm seen. I feel seen by the experiences that you share. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? And what are the identities that you bring to this conversation?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for having me here. I'm honored. So, yes, I am Dr. Kanika. I'm a board certified internal medicine physician. I'm also a best-selling author. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I'm also the founder of Invest Inclusion. And so, Invest Inclusion is an organization where the goal is to disrupt and reimagine health. And so that happens in a couple of ways. One thing, I do workshops and trainings with organizations who are interested, from workplace wellness and well-being. I also do individual health coaching. I do speaking engagements where there's a focus on health equity, DEI, in those spaces. And I am also an assistant professor of medicine where I train the next generation of physicians. So
Wow.
I do a lot.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I stumbled upon you via LinkedIn,
Mhm.
and you were sharing in one of these posts about your book and about health equity, which is something that I haven't really been involved in very much. But as a Black woman, as a Black mother in the South, I have certainly experienced the various repercussions of just being Black and trying to have babies, and accessing medical care and the quality of medical care and all of that. So I am really grateful for the work that you do, and know that it matters. And, it matters. So keep doing it. We need you. Absolutely. Can you tell us about your book? I have it here. Diversity is not a dirty word. Tell us about the book.
So basically, I wrote this book because diversity is not a dirty word, harnessing the power of inclusion to create anti-racist organizations. So the reality is that there are a lot of toxic workplaces out there, and these toxic workplaces absolutely impact our health. And I will say, as people of color, these toxic workplaces definitely have a much greater impact on us. And so there's this concept known as weathering that looks at chronic stressors and the impact that it has on your health. So, as a physician, I care about health. A lot of people are curious as to why a physician would write a book about workplace wellness. And the reality is that wellness doesn't happen in the doctor's office. Wellness happens in your homes, in your communities, and the other place where you spend the majority of your time, which is your workplace. And so that is why I wrote the book. I wrote the book for women of color to read the book and see themselves and to know the experiences that they're having in the workplace are not a them problem. It's a system problem. It's a workplace problem, and then also to give them tools to navigate that space. And I think more importantly than giving the Black woman tools to navigate that space is to give her boss, her supervisor, tools to navigate the space, right? So the first half of the book is about you, for you to feel seen, to feel heard, to know, like, I am not crazy. This place is toxic, and this is why it's toxic. And then the second half of the book is for your boss to say, listen, if you want to create a more inclusive workplace environment, if you want to create an environment that is not toxic, here are some actionable tools that you can use. It's a quick and easy read to help make this place a bit more inclusive and healthy for the people who are here.
Yeah, and I can so relate to this, like, this message being two-part, it being about us and what we can do, but then also being about our supervisors, our bosses, and I'd even say it's so important for me as I am growing into leadership and as I am taking on new leadership opportunities that I have these tools so that as I am being somebody's supervisor or somebody's boss or whoever, I'm able to make sure that I'm implementing measures within the workplace that allows people to feel safe and seen and heard and all of those things. So I love it.
Let me add, and I just want to add to that
Yes.
because it's not like you go from, so we have like this idea about who's the boss, who's the manager, who's the director. Yesterday, the director was just a regular employee who got a promotion, right? And
Mhm.
so once you get these promotions, you don't automatically have the tools in place to help you be a good leader, to help you create, environments, good work environments. And so I think it's super important for anybody who ends up or who wants to have a leadership position, who knows they will be in a leadership position, to get these tools in place. Because I truly believe a lot of people who are in leadership positions, they don't mean to do harm, but they do
Right,
harm because they don't have the tools to do better. And
right.
so, absolutely, I love the fact that you were saying not only to be seen, but when you get into these positions, you will know how to create spaces that are inclusive and non toxic. So,
Right. Know better, do better. I wanted to share, to read from your book, if that's okay, because there was one line that I had to underline, I had to highlight, because it's something that I've talked about a lot on the podcast, but I love the way that you phrase it. And it says, "It was an unspoken, yet I received the message loud and clear. I had a choice. I could choose to be Black and embrace my culture, or I could choose to be successful." And in this part of the book, you were talking about your hair specifically, and, what somebody else thought of your hair and the questions that they were asking you. And I haven't dealt with it with my hair, surprisingly, but I've dealt with it in so many other ways where comments are being made about how I'm showing up. And it's really feels as though I can either be in line with my culture or I can be successful, but the 2 can't happen at the same time. And so I really appreciated you just putting those words to it because I think sometimes it's easy for us to, like, gaslight ourselves around that fact or feel like you're making it up, like I'm making it up. And 2, it's hard to put words to it sometimes, so I appreciated that.
no, thank you. It's interesting. So that the issue with the hair, this was happening in medical school. And so medical school for me was a long time ago. I graduated from medical school in 2005. So 2000, 2005. And so hair was a huge issue. And
Mm.
so it's interesting that as you're stating now, like hair hasn't been such a huge issue. And I think the reason hair may not be such a huge issue now is like one, you're in Atlanta. So
Yeah.
so let's celebrate, being in a space where you're celebrated and accepted in those ways, right? But also the recognition that the way I felt then is not necessarily the way that I feel now.
Mhm,
And so when we talk about I can choose to be Black or I can choose to be successful, that was a reality for me then.
mhm.
What I will say now, and so let's do this math. We are what? 15, 18, almost 20 years later, which is hard to believe. Um, I've changed a little bit, right?
Mhm,
I've changed in terms of I truly believe that the path forward is to be my authentic self. What I say is you will never, ever out white people.
mm,
And what I mean when I say you will never out white people is you will never be as white as them. You will never be white enough. And so when we are changing our intonation, when we are changing the way we dress, when we are changing our hair, when we're doing all of these things because we are trying to assimilate, because we think assimilation is the key forward, no, I no longer agree with that,
right.
because I've done that. I've been there. I actually took an etiquette class. So I went to Hopkins. So smart enough to get into Hopkins. And while I'm at Hopkins, instead of learning the things that I should have been learning at Hopkins, I took an etiquette class. Why did I
Mm,
take an etiquette class? Is so that I would know how to speak. I would know which fork to use. I would know what are the proper ways to move within the society that I'm about to go into. And really, what it was is how do I learn to be more white?
mm,
And so, as a person who's gone through all of these spaces, what I can tell you is that even when you have all the degrees, when you've done all the things, when you've learned how to speak, you learned how to dress, you learned how to like not take up too much space, it will not be enough. And so, we may talk more about this later, but I just want it to be clear that the thoughts that I had as a someone in my 20s is very different than the thoughts that I have now as somebody in my 40s because I played that game and
mhm,
it still didn't work. And
mhm.
so I have very different ideas about how to move through space now as a Black woman.
Yeah, and I think, that's a word. It really is because I too am now moving into this space of like, I cannot separate any of my identities from the workplace. So there were times when I could, and I think about the soul sickness that that created within me. And at the time, it felt necessary. It felt like I needed to do this, like you said, to be successful. And now it's more of I just don't want to be in that space if that space can't hold all of me.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's a journey to get there, and I think it's not without risk. Um, and many of us, don't have we don't have the capacity to take that risk right now. And so, I acknowledge that. I see that. I see you. Hopefully, as we start to develop and grow professionally, but also become more in tune and in sync with who we are and our identities, we're able to have more control over the spaces that we show up in and how. So tell me, because one thing that you mentioned in your book that I've been like dying to know about is this idea of a name change. You talk about how you changed your name because you were concerned, and correct me if I'm wrong, about your name sounding too black.
Oh, so painful. Yes, that is what happened. So once again, it goes back to the assimilation piece, right? It goes
Hmm.
back to recognizing that your Blackness will be weaponized against you. Your Blackness becomes like this thing that holds you down, no matter how smart you out are, no matter what you've accomplished. Like this Blackness feels like a heavy cloak to bear. And so what's really interesting about the name change is so I did change my name and I changed it legally because I'm all in for everything I do. So my birth name is Kanika and I was at Hopkins. So I went to medical school. I did my residency training to become a physician. I had this epiphany that there was something missing, and so from that point, I actually went to Hopkins and got my master's in public health.
Mm,
And so because I thought I would be Surgeon General one day, and you also know we think we have to have all the degrees,
all of
but
them.
that's another conversation.
Hmm.
Um, so at Hopkins, I was just tired of always being the Black person. And you understand what it's like to be the only in so many spaces. And so after a while, it just becomes draining. And I wanted to just be me. I didn't want to be the voice for all Black people. I didn't want to have to represent for every Black person. I wanted to be me, which is ironic because part of being me is being Black. I get it. I wasn't necessarily being the most rational. Um, but so on the phone, you could not tell if I were Black or white because I can change the intonation of my voice and you would never know. Via email, you would not know. But if you saw my name, the name Kanika was very clear. This is a person of color. And so like there are even concerns about can you get an Airbnb if you are a Black person,
Mm,
right? Like
mhm.
there are actual real ramifications for being Black in America,
Right.
you know. And so I decided that I just wanted to just be me without being it sounds crazy. So I changed my name to Michelle.
Oh, Michelle. Okay.
Michelle was my middle name.
Okay.
I dropped my first name, legally changed it to Michelle, and then I was about 40, and I was like, "No, this is who I am. I will not this is my name. This is my identity. This is how can I tell my children to be proud, to be Black, to be proud of who they are, to love themselves, to love their hair, to love their skin tone, to love themselves, and I'm calling myself Michelle." And so I was finally at a place where truly, truly being my authentic self is who I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And if I died, I was not going to die Michelle. And so I decided to legally change it back to Kanika. And so we've come full circle. And it's really interesting. I've come full circle. And so there's
Mhm.
some things that I'm going to say about authenticity and being your true self. And you can't out white people, like all those things. But also understanding it's been a complete and it's been a long journey for me to get to where I am.
Mhm. And you started out by saying this is gonna sound crazy or something to that effect, and it doesn't because as a mother, we have like, Black women have conversations about what we're gonna name our kids because we know that it matters. Like, we know that it matters. If your name has apostrophes, that matters. If your name is something that's not easily pronounceable, if your name sounds Black, quote unquote, that means something. Like, everything that we can do to set our kids up for success, we're gonna do, at least me and my husband. And so it was never what we named our children was gonna need to be something that could be neutral, race neutral. So we named
Yes.
our sons Everett and Royce, and that's their name, and yes, we've gotten feedback, particularly about Everett's name, that it's a white name. It's his name, and his name matters. I don't know what to tell you. His name matters. So, it's not crazy. I was so curious to know, like, what that journey was like, and being somebody that's represented people in name change cases, I'm just, like, exhausted for all the steps that you had to take.
And can we talk about the fact that when I changed my name initially, I had just completed residency. So Kanika had nothing, right? But 10 years later, Michelle had something. And so I just remember being like, "Oh my goodness, this is a big deal." Yes. And I also want to say I'm a little conflicted with the naming of the children
Mm,
because I am with you. And you're right. I was very intentional in naming my children, and their names Aria, Tristan, Austin.
mm,
And I love their names. I love them. But I do sometimes there are people who their children have much more interesting names. And I'm like, I wish I had been a bit bolder and I had given
mhm,
them, a bolder name or an African name or that sort of thing. And I didn't. It's too late now, but definitely you're right. There's a lot of thought that goes into what do we name our children. Um, and so in my third child, she's a female. Her name is Austin. I actually really like country music, and so I know.
breaking
I
stereotypes.
know. And so, I love Blake Shelton, and so I wanted to name her Austin Blake, and my husband was like, "No, you are not naming my daughter Austin Blake." When I tell you people would not know what was hitting them when this Black girl walked in with a name and they're thinking they're getting a white
Mhm,
male.
mhm,
So no, it's Austin Willow. But
mm.
yes, I I almost went all in with white male name for my Black daughter. So
I love that. So, okay, let's talk about when we are in these situations at work, we're weathering the storm, we're weathering the racial toxicity. What are things that we can do to advocate for ourselves? What would you suggest to your younger you?
So what I will say, the first thing I will say is I will share how I navigated this system. So for me, the toxicity didn't occur until later. I would say mid-career. Once you think that you're beyond those things, and I will tell you as a Black person in America, you're never beyond those things. You will never have enough degrees to protect you. And so for me, I was really caught off guard because I'd done all the right things and I was really surprised when it happened. And so my first response was to push back. But then my next response was actually to shrink. I
Mm,
started shrinking. I started keeping my head down. I started, being really mindful. I didn't want to make waves. And what that did when I started diminishing myself is it started making me anxious. And I remember leaving work one day and calling a really good friend of mine, and I was in tears. And I said to her, I made a really, really big mistake coming here. And I felt like there was something wrong with me
mm,
because you start internalizing these messages. It's almost impossible not to. And so sometimes what we do is we just leave those toxic work environments. You recognize this is not good for me and you leave.
right.
What I did instead was I I said I will not leave based on fear. I will leave on my own terms. And so, what I then decided to do is one, I got therapy. And I probably needed therapy before then, but I therapy played a really integral part in me recognizing that this was not a me problem. This was a system problem. And so, how I chose to navigate this would really be a huge part of my legacy.
Mm,
And so the next thing I did is I looked for allies, and I did not find allies in my department. There were allies in other departments. And these allies were Black women in more advanced roles. So they were senior Black women who saw me, women
mm,
who validated me as a human, women who validated me as a professional, women who made me realize, like, no, I am amazing, right?
yeah.
And so finding those people who can validate you for who you are and help you see yourself in another light other than the narrative that's being told to you by typically what will be your immediate, supervisor, right? And so what that looked like for me was joining a DEI leadership committee. It turned into me being an implicit bias trainer within this organization. Um, it looked like me speaking to my supervisor, and making them aware of what was happening. It meant me sharing my story because I think what happens frequently when you're in these situations is that you start feeling shame, and that shame and not wanting anyone to know because maybe there is something wrong with you. And when you realize there is nothing wrong with you, I keep saying this, it is a system problem. It is a them problem. It is not a you problem. And so for me, that was the path that I took. And so it was a path that I ended up being in a position where I was educating my boss.
Mm,
We actually had a sit down conversation about what was happening and about the microaggressions and about the toxicity and about this is what it looks like and this is what it is. And this was a conversation where there was a neutral third party involved. Don't
okay.
ever sit in a room by yourself with a person who may not be safe for you. Um, and we had these conversations. And so I ended up being the person who would send her news clippings or send her articles or send her this book she should read. I ended up having to be the person to educate her. And a couple of things I'll say about that. One, for anyone in a toxic situation, make sure that you are safe. That is first and foremost. So what's safe physically, safe psychologically, don't put yourself in harm's way. It is not your responsibility to educate your oppressor. It is not your responsibility to educate your abuser. If you choose to do so, that is your choice, but it is not your responsibility. And so for me, that was a part of my empowerment. And so I'm an educator. This is what I do. And so I did that because it was healing for me. Um, and so those are what I would say would be the primary things, creating a safe space and having allies, having a community. Something else that really worked for me is I don't know if you're familiar with Austin Channing Brown. She wrote a book, I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World
Oh,
Made for Whiteness. Yes, it is an amazing book. And she talked about her experiences in toxic spaces, but this was in, the church space.
Okay.
And so, but I'm reading her book. And as I'm reading her book, I'm seeing myself. Every experience, I'd had a similar experience. And that made me feel validated. And once again, it made me realize it was not a me problem, it was a them problem. And I think that is the key when you're navigating toxic spaces is not internalizing the toxicity. Um, and that allows you, it gives you more power
Mhm.
to have the power to recognize that you are amazing and that you have a choice. You have a choice to stay or you have a choice to leave, but you will not give them agency over how you exist in these spaces. And so, another thing I would recommend, and I promise this is not self serving, but I would say read my book. I
Mhm.
hope my book would do for you what Austin Channing Brown's book did for me. And that was to make me realize I am not alone. This is not a me problem, it's a them problem. And then the second part of the book, if you choose to, you can give the book to your boss and say, you probably should read this because it does give them tools to create a more inclusive, healthy workplace. And so, and if you don't have to give them your book. You can tell them to go get the book. But just recognizing that you have agency, there are tools that are out there that will help you. It is not your responsibility to train and to teach, your boss, but there are tools there to help you do it if you choose to. So,
Wow. One of the tools that I had used was talking to a career coach. I had never talked to a career coach before, but my work offered this benefit of being able to have sessions with a career coach, similar to like an EAP program, and being able to speak to a counselor. And she asked me this question that you raise as well around diminishing your sense of self and diminishing your sense of passion and purpose. And the question was around like, can you continue in this environment without diminishing your sense of self? Um, and that had never been posed to me before when I'm trying to determine this is a difficult situation, what am I going to do about it? Um, but I love how you handled like in this example of you figuring out a way to support yourself through therapy and through these other tools, through these books and resources that you were reading, and then to continue in your message. Um, and I think it's really encouraging to hear about another way out, if you will, other than leaving the job.
right.
And like you said, be in a safe environment. Like, you don't have to be in a toxic situation, and you can leave your job, but there are other options, and you're sharing what you experienced is definitely powerful.
And I will say I did ultimately leave, but I
Mhm.
left on my terms,
Right.
right? I left in my full glory. By the time I left, that same boss was saying, I hate that you're leaving. No, she said to me, she said, no one else will be honest with me the way you've been. No one else will tell me where there's room for improvement and how I could do things differently. And, on one level, I was like, but at what cost to myself?
Mhm.
Right? Like, great.
Mhm.
I'm so glad that this has been helpful for you.
Right.
But at what cost to me? But it was just really interesting how by the time I left, she was actually relying on me to say, oh, you're the only person who will be honest and who, so it's just really interesting how those things can change. And the other thing I wanted to say in terms of one of the tools, so I hear people saying a lot, you should be humble, be humble, keep your head down, do good work. And I say, don't be humble. Do not be humble. Be your most brilliant self. It serves nobody for you to diminish your light. And who does it serve for you to play small? It doesn't serve you, right? So when you get this messaging saying be humble, play small, I'm like, no. You should love yourself, you should brag on yourself, you should know how amazing you are. And if there's anybody who is uncomfortable with you loving yourself and recognizing how brilliant you are, then they can look the other way. They
Mhm.
can put on shades if your light is too bright. But I am definitely a proponent of being your full and authentic self, and it goes back to what I said earlier. playing small, trying to be like them, trying to assimilate will never, ever work. It just doesn't work. And so not only is it not working to achieve the purpose that you wanted to achieve, but it's also harming you
Right.
versus being your beautiful, full, authentic self and then recognizing, although it will make some people uncomfortable, what it will also do is give other people permission to be themselves.
Mm.
And it could just I've seen it have benefits far beyond what you would expect. And instead of you being alienated, further alienated, it actually can open up doors and opportunities for you in ways that you would not have expected.
Yeah, I'm gonna look up that book that you were talking about, and I'm gonna make sure that it's available in our show notes as well as your book. Like you said, it is so validating reading these books, knowing that you're not alone, that I'm not alone, that it's not me, and as you said, that it's a system. Um, so I do hope that folks who are listening, use these resources where they're needed. I hope that this podcast can be a resource as well. Like, this is the whole point for folks to know that you're not alone, to be validated, and to really kind of unearth your power, your inherent power, because we are so amazing. We have so much to offer. And yeah, we have some hurdles. We have some systemic hurdles that we have to get over, and we're here to do that together.
I love that you talked about power. So I have a friend, he's like really successful in like the IT space. And he was talking about one of his colleagues who's a black man. And he was like, I'm not gonna use his name, but he was like, he's black. He's like blackety black. He's like no hold barred, no hold bars. And so he was just saying how that is his superpower.
Mm.
His blackness is his superpower. And it was really interesting to me to hear that. And at the time I thought, huh, could my blackness be my superpower? And that's just something to think about. Instead of it being this thing that you have to be less of, could your blackness be your superpower and the thing that you bring to this world, to this workplace, to the spaces that you're in? Imagine, because it serves no one for there to just be more of the same.
Wow. And that's the title of the episode. Let your blackness be your superpower.
Oh, love it.
Well, Dr. Kanika, let us know where we can find you.
So, I'm on all the social media platforms at Dr. Kanika MD, DrKanikAMD. So that's Twitter. Really love hanging out on LinkedIn, but you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram. My book, Diversity is Not a Dirty Word, you can find it at www.diversityisnotadirtyword.com. So, made that easy for you. And if you're interested in health coaching, if you're interested in workshops, if you like to have me come and speak at your organization, I'm also at drkanikamd.com. So, do you love the way I have fully embraced my name?
I
So we are
do. I'm thinking to myself, she did not say Dr. Michelle. She said Dr. Kanika.
yes, we did not even say Dr. Sims, okay? Dr. Kanika, Kanika, and all of his beautiful ethnicity and all of it. So, yes, thank you so much, Whitney, for having me here. It was fun to speak with you. And I hope that some people are inspired.
Yeah,
It really, it really hurts to know that there's so many amazing, beautiful, brilliant Black people in these workspaces who are shrinking and becoming less of themselves because of the messaging that they're getting. And I know we didn't talk about imposter syndrome here, but um, yeah, we are not the imposters. It's just we aren't. And so hopefully my message, my story will help people recognize how amazing they are
yeah,
and to step into it and to own it.
absolutely. Thank you so much. My cheeks hurt because I've been smiling this whole time. I've had such a good time talking to you. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to listen to past episodes and to subscribe. Also, feel free to leave me a message. I want to know what you think about this show. So you can do that by leaving a review, or you can do that by sending me an email at impostrixpodcast@gmail.com. This podcast is for me, and this podcast is for you. And I hope that you're leaving this podcast and this experience feeling validated, because that's the goal. Be validated. Until next time.